So welcome everyone to our webinar this morning on addressing bullying between older adults. We are so pleased to partner again with Dr. Kirsten Madison from Sheridan College. She's the lead seniors anti-bullying project person that has been working on this initiative for the past few years. She's also a professor at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. So we've had the pleasure of working together for many years, and she's going to provide us with an update on some of the projects, but give us a baseline about what bullying is between older adults. So we have a base understanding around that issue, and we know we've had a lot of requests within our organization about doing presentations around bullying in older adults. So hopefully today you'll learn a little bit more about that information and a new toolkit that will help you support other residents or seniors that you may be working with, and inform all seniors who are joining about being more attentive to some of the issues or risk factors of those who may be more vulnerable to bullying and how we can prevent that. So without further ado, I want to begin with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we gather on the traditional territory of a number of First Nations and acknowledge their stewardship of this land and its waters as protectors of its natural abundance throughout the ages. We seek a new relationship with the original peoples of this land that remains their home to this day. May this relationship be one of peace and friendship, based in honor and deep respect. So just a few tips to optimize your experience today. We do have ASL interpreters with us today. So you have a couple options to improve or to optimize your experience. You can change the little grid box at the top of the screen where you see the visuals to the layout that suits your preference. You could also pull across the screen of the presentation and the speakers to make the speakers larger on your screen, so you can see the interpreters much better. And you can also enable the closed captioning on your screen as well. There's a little button on the black bar that says CC, that's a closed caption that you can turn on or off. Just as a reminder, people's cameras and microphones are muted, but we do encourage conversations through the chat box. If you have things to comment on, if you have a specific question for our speakers, please post that in the Q&A box. We want to make sure that we don't miss that question that you have. Often there's a lot of chat that happens in the chat box, and if a question goes in there, we may miss it. I try my best to track that, but we'll do our best to make sure that we get your answers or your questions responded at the end. As mentioned, we're recording today's session. It will be uploaded on our website in a couple days with the PowerPoint presentation as well, and any links that we share, including the bullying toolkit that Kirsten will be responding to today as well. At the end, we do appreciate your feedback for evaluations. There'll be a little pop-up that comes out on your screen after you leave the session at any time. If you have to leave early, we do appreciate you taking a couple minutes. There's only 7 questions just to give your feedback on today's event, as well as any ideas that you have for future sessions. There's also, at the end, we'll have a QR code that you can scan as well, and I'll also put the link in the chat box. So we do appreciate your feedback. And it will look like this as at the end of the session, just so you know. Just if you have a phone handy, you might want to grab it if you don't have a chance to do it online after you leave the session today. As with all of our public events, we do want to bring to your attention about our privacy and confidentiality. These are public sessions, so we appreciate people may have certain circumstances that they need support with. Please reach out to us privately, and we would be more than happy to support you. We have a 1-833 number now that people can call. You can call our phone number, or you can contact by email on our website as well. And for those who are joining for the first time, just to give you an overview of our organization, our mission really is wholesome in terms of we want to make sure that seniors in Ontario are free from ageism, abuse, where your human rights are advanced, protected, and respected. We are mandated as an organization to implement Ontario's strategy to combat elder abuse, and we have been doing this since 2003. And we have three main pillars of that strategy, which are public education and awareness. We do training to frontline providers so they recognize the signs and know how to intervene. And we help coordinate community services so people know where to get assistance and enhance their abilities to support older adults in the community. The strategy is funded through the Ontario government under the Ministry for Seniors and Accessibility. Please check out our website at EAPON. I'll put the link in the chat box after. Yeah, there's many resources that you can download for free or just view on our website that can be very helpful for individuals, including the bullying toolkit that we'll talk about today. So let me, I don't know what happened there. Sorry, I apologize. I'd like to present or introduce our speaker today. So Kirsten Madsen, as I indicated at the beginning, she is a faculty member at Sheridan College. She received her PhD in developmental psychology at the University of Sheffield in England. And her graduate work really focused on anti-bullying. Since then, she went on to assess anti-bullying strategies that are being implemented in schools across England. She conducts research that's done extensive training with frontline staff in the areas of bullying, aggression, age differences, gender differences, and program development. Currently, she is the project director for the Seniors Anti-Bullying Project. So without further ado, I am going to ask Kirsten to start the presentation.
So hello, everyone. What we're going to be talking today about is addressing bullying between older adults. And this is a partnership between Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario and the Bob Rumble Canadian Centre of Excellence for the Deaf and Sheridan College. The project itself, what we were doing is we worked with 6 seniors residences in order to implement and evaluate a toolkit that is designed to prevent and target bullying behavior between older adults. So while targeting bullying behaviors, our focus included community building, because what we've learned is that you cannot tackle the issue of bullying without encouraging community and perspective taking. Many older adults don't even realize what they're doing is bullying behavior until they see how it impacts others. So this webinar is going to provide an overview of what bullying between older adults looks like, and will focus on the actions taken to address the behavior. So the objectives of this webinar are basically to talk about the Seniors Anti-Bullying Implementation and Evaluation Project, and to describe briefly the toolkit as it is and how it's used. And then we're going to talk about what we learned from evaluating the toolkit. So what worked, the lessons learned, and I'll give you a little bit of an update of what to expect next. But before we do anything, we really need to talk about what is bullying behavior. So the definition itself. Bullying is sometimes called harassment and happens when someone hurts, intimidates, or scares a peer consciously or unconsciously. And this is really important because what we found, especially with older adults, is oftentimes they're engaged in bullying behavior and don't even recognize that it is bullying behavior. Now, when someone is being bullied, they often have a hard time defending themselves. Bullying is usually not a one-off thing. It often happens over and over again. It can become a pattern of behavior. And for this project, what is really important to understand is we were discussing bullying, which is based on peer-to-peer bullying interactions and not perpetuated by a person who's in a position of trust. That would constitute elder abuse. And yes, elder abuse involves bullying, but what we're going to be doing with regard to today's discussion and what pertained to the toolkit was its peer-to-peer interactions. So to give you a bit of an idea more about what bullying actually is, it is directed at a specific person or group of people. It's when a person or people want power over another person or people. They may want people to comply with specific expectations of how they think people should behave. It's when a person or people want something from somebody else. So they want to take something from somebody else, but that also might involve space. And maybe wanting ownership of seating in a lobby or in a residence. Now, specifically, some examples of bullying between older adults are as follows: spreading rumors, putting down someone in front of others. So criticizing or lying about people who do not dress or behave in the way that you want them to, because you want them to comply with what you expect. Using guilt tactics to get something you want. Excluding others. Obstructing people from getting to where they need to be. For example, a walker. Blocking off seating for a social group. Stealing and destroying property to show that you have power over somebody else. An example of this is pulling out someone's plants from a communal garden. So these are all examples. Now, before this project began, there was research that showed some of the impacts of bullying behavior on older adults. So the impact that it had on the target specifically, like functional changes, not just in relation to cognition, but also with regard to behavior. Physical health was also impacted. They found in previous studies that there was a reduction in self-esteem. Again, I said cognitive health. Emotional safety could cause anxiety and depression and isolation. Now, in fact, the partnership between Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario and Sheridan began because Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario were receiving calls from older adults, and those working with older adults, they needed information about strategies on how to address this. And there wasn't anything that was evidence-based or research-based. So really, this began this partnership moving forward. And the project itself, so the Seniors Anti-Bullying Project was launched in 2018. So the aims of that project is to collect data on the prevalence and nature of senior-to-senior bullying, and crucially, to use this data to create a resource package outlining best practices for older adults and those working with older adults to stop bullying. So what we did, we had to start off by surveying. So we did a survey of older adults in Ontario. 683 people responded, which is Herculean because the survey was 7 pages long. It was done in either an online version or a print version. And very importantly, we found out that in fact, yes, this is an issue And the top behaviors were also something we wanted to identify: manipulation, sarcasm, giving people the silent treatment, rumors, trying to make people look stupid in front of other people, and verbal aggression. And we found within our survey that yes, the effects were serious. The targets of bullying behavior had said that it was extremely upsetting. 69% reported that it was upsetting or extremely upsetting, and that it could lead to social withdrawal. Witnesses said, 45% said they became angry. 18% said they were worried it would happen to them. In fact, one person on the survey said, I would like to stand up for the person, but I know I would be the next one to be bullied. So clearly we knew we needed to do something and we were in the right direction. So we brought the survey results to stakeholders, to 4 full-day interactive workshops. I got to say, Rayanne was an absolute superstar in helping with in these workshops. So we brought the results there, and through these workshops, we pulled out different themes and points that needed to go into our toolkit. And the results was a toolkit, and it's called Solutions, Everybody's Business, Senior to Senior Anti-Bullying Toolkit. You're going to see on the last slide of the presentation, my presentation, the URL to get to the link in order to download this version, the 2020 toolkit. And just for any of our French viewers or people who would like the French version as well, very importantly, we've got an English version and we have a French version on that slide. Now, this portion that I'm going to be focusing on is what we did was we implemented and evaluated the toolkit in order to see if it would actually work. So we implemented this toolkit in seniors' residences, specifically retirement homes, seniors' housing, and independent living. Because I will tell you that the toolkit is accessible and easily used for people not only in residential setting, but also community centers. But our implementation project, that's where we focused on. So we systematically evaluated the process described, and we used the feedback from stakeholders so that we're going to be able to make modifications and additions to the toolkit. I will also love to announce that we have been funded to update the toolkit. So we're going to be beginning to take all this information that we learned, update the toolkit, and then load it back up on probably the end of 2026 and make it available for everybody free of charge. So the toolkit itself, the aims of the toolkit itself are to prevent and target bullying behaviors. It includes strategies and activities. It's really flexible, so it can meet the needs of different seniors organizations. It's also very participant-centered, so that you can respond to the needs of the participants and the people that you're working with in order to add things. The toolkit itself is modular, the one that's available right now online, but you can also easily print it off. It turns into a beautiful printable version. Each module has clear aims and an instruction of the module, activities, templates, and resources. Now, the toolkit is comprised of different modules, as I said. One is policy and procedure. And this is really, really important because in all the different anti-bullying projects working with different populations, it's been found that the key to success is a policy and procedure. So to link, and it's a good idea to link to existing policies and procedures. So what is a policy and procedure? Basically, the policy is a Organizations statement about what's being presented, in this case, bullying behavior. It includes the scope, who it applies to, and provides a definition of what the behavior is. Your procedure is the required actions required in order to meet what's been set out in the policy. One of the things that we found at the workshops was that everybody asked for confidential avenues of reporting to be included in. So ideally, if people are working on anti-bullying projects, there's going to be reductions in bullying, but there also people wanted to have avenues that they could report if they felt they couldn't handle it themselves. It needs to be alive and updated. And for example, even though the Bob Rumble Center of Canadian Excellence for the Deaf is a partner, they're also one of our sites. And they have an ASL video of their PowerPoint video that's posted on their website for the world to see. It's also shown to every resident before they move in. So clearly theirs is alive and they keep up and they intend on updating it. Now, the next module is discussion and education. The aim is awareness raising and clarification. And this is really, really important because there are developmental differences between bullying behavior in older adults and other groups. And so this is a way of getting people to reflect. And what we do is before workshops, we get people to reflect on when we did our workshops, on what bullying actually is. And so we'd be using exercises from this module throughout the entire program. These activities are useful with all the other modules. They include case studies and illustrating diverse viewpoints. One of the things I want you to note, though, we never use labels such as victim or bullying. Rather, we focus on the behavior. Because really, again, going back to this whole notion that oftentimes people aren't even aware that their behavior is having a negative implications. That's why also through discussion and education, people have these aha moments where, for example, one person realized that when she was venting about people that she was frustrated with, in fact, she was speaking badly about others and others were joining in with her. Now that leads to rumors. That leads to speaking badly about others. And that makes it acceptable to speak negatively about somebody else. So they have these aha moments. It also sparks really important discussions. Our third module was response training so that people themselves can actually do something. So one section's on targets of bullying behavior. Another one is for witnesses to becoming allies and supporting others. And a third is alternatives to bullying behaviors. Now, we never advertised during our implementation project a workshop specifically designed to teach people who are engaging in bullying other types of behaviors. Because who would sign up for that? So what happened was it was advertised as ways of considering alternatives through assertiveness, communication, de-escalating situations, conflict management. So these alternatives to bullying behavior are really, really important, but it's very important when considering how it's actually you get people to come to the different sessions. So the fourth module is creating a positive environment. This you build on your existing programs. This is a module that's going to be expanded upon most in our updated toolkit because every single site asks for more sessions to promote kindness. It has become evident that bullying behavior is a social behavior and a consequence of the social environment. And I always say, just as kindness is contagious, so is bullying. And it can lead to a toxic environment. As such, many workshops now focus on community building and creating positive, supportive environments where people feel more comfortable in sharing and talking and discussing so that they can resolve issues before it becomes bullying behavior. There's a final section that includes all these templates. So a template for creating a comfort agreement. A comfort agreement is something that the group, the participants in the group, and the facilitator set up with different rules and expectations so people feel safe in talking and sharing. And this is really important because oftentimes early on in the workshops, there may be a person who's in the workshop who is being targeted by somebody who's also in the workshop. Now, there's forms for incident reports, policies, procedures, posters, just to give people resources to help with setting this up. So that's how the toolkit looks. As I had said on the final slide, you're going to be able to, you can download it and have a look at it. Now I'm going to talk about the project itself, how we implemented and evaluated it. So originally we had 7 sites, but one withdrew because of continued lockdowns. I just want to point out, we went into sites in January of 2023, and this particular site continued to experience lockdowns. So despite withdrawing, I will say that they provided great ideas to support the project, and we are very grateful to them that they came along as they did. 6 independent seniors residences in the GTA completed the entire project, which we were in sites anywhere between 11 months to 16 months. One of our sites serves the deaf community and provided and continues to provide invaluable information and support specific to this population. And I'd also like to note that all the sites approached us to be part of the project. And we were clear that there were certain requirements. One was that there was a staff liaison because we have a train the trainer model, so that a staff member, and in some cases, they sent 3 people to every session so that they were really in a position to be able to continue once we left, because we were only there for about 11 to 16 months per site. They were also required to do a pre-post survey. One of the reasons is this is a research project that was supported and funded by SSHRC and NSERC. So we had to also demonstrate whether or not bullying behavior was reduced. But also a survey is really important because the pre-survey gave a lay of the land as to what is happening at the site, the behaviors that are happening, where they're happening, so that when people are setting up the different workshops and thinking in terms of their project, they have an idea of what they need to address. Again, the policy and procedure was required. And I can't stress enough that it was very much participant-centered. So this is an evaluation project, but because the toolkit is also participant-centered, we very much geared each workshop to each site, using what was in the toolkit, but focusing on their needs, and also building upon what was in the toolkit. So as we were going, we were creating new things based on the needs. And that's also a bit of what I'm going to share and what will be in the updated toolkit. So to evaluate it, we had to do a pre-post survey. And then looking at behaviors, we conducted formal interviews. So 30 formal interviews with staff and older adults who were participants in order to get feedback as to the project itself. But we also engaged in informal feedback and planning. Now, this informal feedback not only provided valuable information on the efficacy of the toolkit and how to improve it, but all this information also provided incredible information on the nature and bullying of behavior between older adults, specific to this group, that how it differs from bullying in the workplace and other age groups. So it's been incredible, this whole learning journey. Now we'll talk about the outcomes. So what happened? We were there 11 to 16 months, and did it work? Well, the survey itself was inconclusive. I got to be honest. But there were issues with that. We didn't match the surveys, so we didn't know if it was the same person who did the first survey versus the final survey. We couldn't do it with regard to ethical reasons. So one of the things that did come out, though, so with regard to the survey itself, though it was inconclusive, the interviews, the formal qualitative interviews, provided a wealth of additional information with regard to outcomes. One being that there were reductions in bullying, but it explained the inconclusive results because people were stating that there was more reporting of bullying behavior. People were more aware of what bullying is. They could put a name to it. So that was really important, and that gave us insights into the inconclusive results with regard to the survey itself and the number crunching. Also, the interviews provided really important information on outcomes. I'm going to go into more detail about them, but a huge area was that because of the project, there was a lot more community building, and it created the momentum to keep going because bullying never goes away. But it's a matter of staying on top of it and continuing to work towards always building community, trying to address issues before they become toxic. It also, some of the outcomes were, we took the informal from feedback, were people having these aha moments, this self-reflection. For example, the venting and the impact that it has on the environment. I already gave you that example. Also, here's a lovely quote with regard to outcomes of the project. When we asked one staff member if the project was helpful, you can see in this slide, they said, absolutely, absolutely, because I think the workshops involved different sessions where you would talk about how you can properly deal with conflict and how to talk to each other and tell people how you feel without being rude about it. I think it was very helpful for some residents, especially those that were a little, let's just say I'll just be straight up, really rude. I think they got it like, oh shoot, maybe, my tone or the way I've been sitting and, the way I'm kind of presenting myself can come across as confrontational. This person also stated that the role playing was great. Now, clearly, more work needs to be done. So each one of the sites, we started it going, but there needs to be continuity. And this was what was really important, what one staff member said. It's starting a conversation. I think there's more work to be done for sure, but I definitely think it started a conversation. So it's really important that it's ongoing. Now, specific outcomes that have been identified are as follows. Specifically, that was said in the interviews was that a positive outcome were the workshops and the activities themselves. The fact that the issue was actually brought to the attention. It's interesting because when we first introduced this project to one of our sites, way back in 2018, a woman stood up and she said, "You people are really smart. But what did you think? That older adults don't bully? We do. And how come it took you so long to get here?" Now, for me, that was reaffirming. But it's also important that the awareness raising it happened. Also, a positive outcome was community engagement itself, people getting involved, and the momentum that kept going. For example, one site now has a kindness committee. And I will tell you, this kindness committee doesn't just do things to support kindness at this residence, but they actually work together to engage with the outside community to help. It built confidence. That was something. In speaking out for oneself, but also for others. It was really important, they said, with regard to communication with each other, perspective taking, and working on understanding miscommunication. Now, why did it work? So what was it that worked? I will tell you right now, this was not something that came up in the interviews, but something we observed. The site's stand on bullying. You had organizations that were so invested, and really, you saw those were the ones that really were able to accomplish incredible things. Now, what worked overall with all 6 sites was staff, that they were trying, that it was supportive, that they were trying to be accountable. The fact that we were also, that the organization itself, so that they were involved and listening, that we would debrief with the liaisons as well after every single session, so that if something came up, the staff were aware of it, so that people felt that they were listened to. And this was something that the participants acknowledged within the interviews. This was important. I have to say, resident engagement, I must applaud it on the sharing and the openness of what they were doing. But we needed to, and what they stated, what worked was create a trust and safe environment. So during workshops, so that people felt comfortable raising issues, because it was all about solution focused and coming up with ideas. The workshops themselves were identified as working because they were varied, because the diversity within the participants was incredible. There were some people that really liked the lecture bursts at one site. There were a lot of retired professionals, in fact, some professors who really appreciated knowing the background knowledge. And then there were others that loved the craft-based stuff. Some didn't like it, but some did. We had role playing and there were games associated. So we were always really clear about what would be in the workshop when we were advertising it. They were accommodating. So not only with regard to the things that right away jump out in your mind, like visual or hearing or mobility, but also the fact that new residents come in who are new to the project. So each time, by reviewing the definition and getting people up to speed, it was helpful for everybody. It really was refreshing, but it made sure that more and more people would be able to come in. It was cited that it was consistent. One woman said she loved to look forward to the first Wednesday of every month, knowing that the workshops would be happening. They were clear, and it was learning, that there were aims laid out, new information provided, discussions, and that they were fun. they were strength-based because even though the terminology is very negative, bullying, it was solution focused. So there's no blame game. Instead, everybody is invited to improve the environment. There's sharing going on. The places that already formalized their policies and procedures, there was statements about how well that was working. And in one place, I have to say something that was identified as important was changing the name. At one site, they felt really uncomfortable with the whole idea of bullying because these were people that may not have necessarily been exposed to the concept of workplace bullying. So for them, they were thinking in terms of bullying happens amongst children. So we changed the name. And I will say, I have to give a nod to our colleagues in Sherbrooke because I use their idea of living well together from their gift program. And they really embrace that. Now, as I said, not only did we learn a lot with regard to what worked, but we also got valuable information on why does bullying happen. So, and how is this different? One was unresolved issues, pent-up frustrations, different communication styles, basically just miscommunication. A person thinks they're being bullied when in fact that wasn't the intention. Because depending on cultures, your culture being your ethnicity, your gender, your neighborhood, even the workplace you come from, all these things impact your development and how you communicate. For example, in one culture, it's very respectful to look somebody directly in the eye when they're talking to show that you're interested. In other cultures, that's disrespectful. But if you're in a culture where their expectation is somebody's going to look at you, if you're not looking at them, they're going to think that what they're saying is being dismissed. And in the culture where you don't look somebody in the eye, they'll think you're being aggressive. All these things are important and led to rich conversation. The bullying behavior is often a response to being bullied. We had people come to sessions saying, I'm here because I know I'm engaging in bullying because I don't know what else to do. I'm getting bullied. They do not know their behavior is in fact bullying. They get people to behave and do what they want, or sometimes just venting. Now, this is especially important with regard to residences themselves. Why do bullying behavior happen? We found that there are various reasons why people might behave this way in a residential setting. For example, with age, people lose agency, and this is really hard. They come across as angry when in fact they're frustrated with the situation and they can't control the situation. So it's important that there are clear guidelines of how a community space should be shared as well. So a reason why bullying can happen is a lack of clear guidelines. So for example, it's important with regard to how the lounge is used, the dining hall, a process for obtaining a garden plot. So clear guidelines to help avoid conflict and reduce bullying. For example, at one place, they now have in their dining hall a list of different rules at the dining hall, like no laptops at the table. Also, another example was adhering to the importance of dining time slots so that there's 2 dining time slots. When a second group comes in, that they can actually sit down. So these are all different things we've learned about why it happens. But other lessons we've really learned is that I can't stress enough, bullying is a social behavior. Therefore, addressing the social environment is key. Now, it's the whole idea that this negativity can lead to toxicity, and the social consequences are immense. It's important with regard to community building. So we really, in the updated version of the toolkit, there's activities with regard to active listening and more on conflict management. because it's important to nurture an environment where people feel free to be able to address issues before they escalate. Basically, not everybody's going to be best friends. We never expected that, but for them to be civil and where people can address issues and problem solve. The other thing that we found as well is that bullying is often a symptom of a larger issue. So, for example, it might be that people are engaging in bullying behavior because they're suffering from an addiction. Now, that's also something, when this came up at one site, they addressed this immediately. We also found, for example, stealing, that it was because people at one site were suffering, there was issues with regard to poverty. So they weren't actually stealing to hurt someone, they were doing it because they needed that. And the others were thinking it was because they were trying to aggress against them. So these are all important lessons learned, and we're using these to make modifications to the toolkit. We're going to have additional activities. We're also going to reformat that training response section. So if you actually open up the toolkit, what it says right there, right now, it says older adults who engage or have engaged in bullying behavior, rather than alternatives to bullying behavior. Well, we're going to have that. And we're also going to have much more with regard to conflict management. In fact, we're going to have a new module on communication styles and active listening, because that's really important with regard to de-escalating situations and preventing bullying from happening. Because prevention is a lot easier than the cure. So additions to the toolkit, one big thing is because we're going to be having accessibility for the deaf community. So there's going to be, in the updated toolkit, a written addendum to the toolkit for stakeholders working with deaf older adults and hard of hearing older adults. We're also developing an ASL video to accompany the toolkit. Now, this toolkit isn't going to target facilitators or those working with older adults. Instead, the focus is going to be on older deaf adults everywhere, so that they're going to be able to use this 40-minute toolkit to learn awareness raise, to learn some of the things that they can do. Our next steps, in fact, are to create this toolkit. We've actually already started with regard to it. Bob Rumble Center for Canadian Excellence for the Deaf are funding this, and they're spearheading it. And I would be amiss not to say Babette Oliveira is such a champion for it. She's working so hard. So we're currently working on that. We're also, our next step is with regard to updating the toolkit. In fact, we've obtained the funding to be able to do this. So we just signed the contracts this morning and moving forward. So stay tuned. Now, as I said, I'm more than happy for you to contact me through email. And also, here is the URL for the 2020 toolkit, both the English and the version, and the French version. So we still have, I wanted to make sure that I was a bit rushed, so I am so sorry to our interpreters. You were superstars with regard to being able to interpret what I was saying, because I wanted to make sure there was time for questions.
Great. Thank you so much. I mean, there is so much to so much to learn. And I think you give a great overview of the things that, the issues that people are experiencing and the work that has been done to address the issue, and giving examples that people can sort of understand what bullying looks like and how they can use the toolkit. I have put the links in the chat box for people to get that information, but we do have a lot of questions. We have about 10 minutes to go through it. So I'm really happy that we have that time. So just maybe going back to the beginning, where were the surveys conducted on Ontario? And I know you talked about the second part around in retirement homes, but were there other senior centers included in the survey results?
Okay, so the very first survey that was done in 2018 was done, it was an anonymous survey that was sent out province-wide. So again, here, Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario were rock stars with regard to advertising it and posting links. We did it through our Centre for Elder Research. It was really broadly sent out, and it was available online. We also sent out paper versions if people requested those. It was translated into 8 languages, so the most predominant languages within the 55 plus community in Ontario. That said, the vast majority were the English version. We had, as I said, 683 respondents. And in fact, so what we found was that 56% of people said that they had been bullied within the last 4 months. 36% said they engaged in bullying, and 59% witnessed it. And I know these figures sound really high. Like, what it did was it really supported the idea that what we were doing was important and what we were embarking on. But also, this was a voluntary survey. It was 7 pages long. So people were likely to be a little bit more invested with regard to answering the questions. And they really were. Like, the open-ended questions people provided a great deal of information in order to give us a better understanding of the nature of bullying between seniors themselves and how that might be different from other groups.
So there was also a
Now,
question
and sorry. So the second part of the question was, that was open to the entire community. Anybody who was 55 plus, anybody 55 plus in Ontario. The surveys specifically for the evaluation of this project were only in those 6 sites. In fact, so we excluded the original surveys from that one site that withdrew for our final evaluation. So it was just those 6 sites with regard to the evaluation of the project itself.
So just getting good, as we're talking about evaluation, there was also a question around surveys. So you talked about doing, when you're doing the phase 2 part, there was pre and post surveys. Are those surveys in the toolkit? So if they were implementing this in their work setting or in their apartment, could they use that survey to show progress?
Yes.
Maybe that's something to consider when we are doing the
Yes.
new toolkit.
And I will tell you too, so we do have a copy in the templates with regard to the survey. And we've actually fine-tuned them. So with regard to, we did the surveys differently with regard to the Bob Rumble Center for Canadian Excellence for the Deaf, so that it was more, so it was less concept-based and it was clearer with regard to how it was being presented. But that also taught us very valuable lessons about the idea that to make it a little bit more sparse and to focus in more. So there will also, the survey that's there is the survey that was approved and worked with when we were working with, the larger PrevNet group with regard to thinking in terms of what needed to be in a survey. But for an update in the future, we're going to get one that's a little bit smaller and more straightforward. I also wanted to make a quick note with regard to the deaf community as well. One of the things we found was it was really important that when we did the survey, that there was also an ASL interpreter there to interpret the written. And we had staff that were Herculean who were sitting with people, helping them, which is an issue from a research perspective. So all the researchers out there, but it was very important that we get that knowledge, because we discovered there were lots of people that were not able to read written English. So that was very important.
There was a question around sort of dementia or people that may not have filters kind of thing. So if a person's often accused of speaking out with no filters, is that considered bullying or similar to a person that may have some dementia in
Yeah,
some
that wouldn't
senior
be bullying.
residents?
Yeah, great question, Marianne. Whoever asked that, brilliant question. Because this is why this was an exclusionary factor with regard to our project itself, because people with dementia was beyond the purview of this project. But we did have people who were early onset dementia that were coming to the workshops, and we were able to help them with regard to learning and community building. But when we talk about is it bullying, one of the things that's really important when I talked about what is bullying is yes, it may not be intentional, but it's not annoying behavior. It's specifically directed at a person or persons. So if a person is just venting out because they're experiencing frustration and saying something that's just on the top of their head, that's annoying. And it may be challenging for people, but it's not directed at anybody. And it's not being done because that person wants power over somebody. It's not because they want to change people or persons. It's not that they want something. They're just engaging in that behavior. So that's very, very important. And that's why that wouldn't constitute bullying behavior.
Okay,
Excellent
thank you for
question.
that. Thank you for that explanation. There's another question around long-term care. How can we better support residents who may be bullying or decision making for their spouses in long-term care? So if there's incidents with, either staff or other residents, would this toolkit then or be useful in that setting as well?
It is, and it has. So some of our sites, in fact, do have they have a long, even though we were working with people that were independent, the independent older adults, they've also been able to use it in other areas because it creates policies and procedures that are made available to families so that also families, it's very transparent. So a family member knows the organization, long-term care facilities stance on the issue. They know what constitutes the behavior and they know who they can contact and what the procedure will be. So it opens up communication so they can advocate for that person, which is very, very important. Also, it impacts. So the whole idea of community building is also very important with regard to a long-term care facility because it is an environment. So working towards creating more positive, harmonious environments helps everyone. One of the things that happened as well is that we had different sites that staff really became involved. In fact, one of the sites asked me to run sessions for staff on miscommunication because they were experiencing it based on their different backgrounds. They were miscommunicating with each other. And in doing that, they became more cognizant of the importance of the project. So it really has this ripple effect. So you can use it. We didn't do the project in long-term care facilities. And that was a matter with regard to research ethics clearance, but it can easily be used there.
Okay. Do you have any sort of advice or guidance around bullying, like there's cliques. We've heard that
Oh,
in
yeah.
some communal living. So, do you have any sort of tips around how to deal with some difficult situations where you have the person who are in that group and then they're bullying against the people that aren't in the group? Um,
So that's the whole idea with regard to it's really getting everybody aware of that these behaviors hurt everyone, that they're toxic. Also, when you do response training, one of the things that you work on is witnesses and ally support. Because oftentimes there might be people in that clique. It's the same thing. There might be people in that clique who don't like what others are doing. But we even had on that very first survey, people writing in saying that they didn't stand up for a witness because it was their friend that was bullying. They felt uncomfortable about it, but it was their friend. So it's this idea of giving people tools in order to communicate and to problem solve and to address issues without excluding people, without creating this blame game. Because we had at one site, a couple of people, they really were upset about the project coming in because they thought it was because of them, that they were identified as bullying, and they would in turn be ostracized and bullied. But as the project progressed, they really realized that wasn't the focus. The focus is on problem solving, creating positive environments, community building, being more assertive in communication. The idea that I have rights, but so do other people, and that it's solution focused. So this clique that is hurting and speaking badly about others, that it's called to the attention that these other people have rights as well. Does that help with regard to it? I know there's no fast, easy answer for that one, but there is a lot of, and that was one of the issues that we really, really worked hard at. We had the lobby ladies.
We have time for one last question, then I'm gonna just do some final slides. How do you accommodate for literacy and comprehension needs of older adults?
So one of the things with regard to that is we make sure that everything is presented in multiple formats. So if we had, for example, we have one activity whereby they're in active listening, where there's a little write-up of a situation, and then the person reads out the situation. Well, we have had issues with regard to literacy. We already knew that going in. So we made sure that the group was large enough, that the person was self-selecting who was actually going to read that section. It was repeated several times. Even with regard to the surveys, we also made sure that the surveys were read out so that people could actually, so that if somebody did have problems with regard to reading, that they wouldn't be isolated or pulled out and identified. One of the things too is the surveys that we did in our residences had a lot, from a visual perspective, had a lot larger font from a reading perspective. But we did have several people who couldn't see as well, and we'd always make sure that they were supported with regard to groups. In fact, at one site, each workshop, as the workshops progressed, there was one woman who could no longer see, and there were two other women that always sat at the same table with her, so that they were also supporting her with regard to the visuals. So it wasn't just the facilitators that were doing it. And that, again, was great problem solving, but it also built community. And one of the things that wasn't specifically mentioned was we had at one site, for example, they said that they got to meet other people who live in the same building, and they didn't have the opportunity for that. So even from that social perspective, it's so important. That's why I said we're targeting bullying behavior, but really the importance is community building, because it's a consequence. Bullying is a consequence of toxic environments, or environments where people don't feel they can speak up. And I have to say, it's really these organizations that came to us, they really wanted to make a difference.
Yeah, and I like the slogan, kindness is contagious. So we'll leave it on that. And I thank you so much, Kirsten, for giving us a really good overview. And I think everyone is looking forward to the revised version of the toolkit that will be distributed on our website and other resource anywhere that we can distribute that to other community groups. We will be doing that and letting people know. We'll probably host another webinar to let people know that the new revised version as well. So just a few quick items before we wrap up. Just letting people know that we are hosting a risk assessment training for those working with older adults. We have trained over 200 people across Canada in regards to this. So we're hosting another session at the end of May. So if you want to sign up, you can find information on our website around that. We also have two upcoming conferences or symposiums that we're doing. One around understanding the legal justice services and protections for older adults in May. Again, these are on our website, as well as we're working with the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse is hosting a webinar, and we're partnering with them on discussing coercive control of older adults in Canada. Those will be two important conferences that are coming up. And again, just as a reminder, here's our survey. Please take a moment as you sign off. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. And for Kirsten, for all of your time, and of course to our ASL interpreters. So thank you so much, everybody. If you are stay tuning, we do have another webinar on cyber safety that is coming up at 1 o'clock. So if you want to spend your afternoon with us, please feel free to do so. Again, thank you everybody for attending today. We do appreciate your participation at our event today. So thank you.